Welcome to Don't Give Up on Testicular Cancer, a podcast where testicular cancer survivors, caregivers, and others who have navigated the cancer journey share their stories. The podcast comes to you from the Max Mallory Foundation, a nonprofit family foundation focused on educating about testicular cancer in honor and in memory of Max Mallory, who died in 2016 at the young age of 22 from testicular cancer. Had he survived, Max wanted to help young adults with cancer. This podcast helps meet that goal. Here now is your host, Joyce Lofstrom, Max's mom and a young adult cancer survivor.
Daniel Makarewicz was diagnosed with testicular cancer on August 11, 2010, at the age of 24. At the time, he was a sports reporter at the Dispatch and the Rock Island Argus in Moline, Illinois. His urologist recommended emergency surgery to remove his left testicle that was eventually classified as stage 1. Following chemo and surveillance, he was deemed a survivor on June 11, 2020, his last checkup with oncologists. So Daniel, I'm so glad that you could join me today and share your story. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about something that impacted my life, and hopefully we can get to a point where it's not impacting so many others' lives.
Right.
I pray to God each day that happens, because as you know, cancer sucks and we got to find a way to get rid of it.
I agree 100%. So tell us your story. Anything you want to start with?
Well, I'll have to go back to when I was the summer before 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. I attended the University of Missouri basketball camp in Columbia, Missouri. And every year they had a guest. They had various coaches come in from various high schools, and one of the coaches, his name was Dave Porter. He coached at Lafayette High School in Baldwin, Missouri, so kind of a west suburb of St. Louis. So he came in and he spoke to the campers about a young man who was a player of his named Jason Struble. And Jason Struble ultimately was diagnosed and succumbed to testicular cancer. And I'll never forget the story, the message, everything like that, because I had never known, at the time I'm 13, 14 years old, I had never known that you could get testicular cancer. And he spoke about it, and it was the same story each year, but it was still impactful. I never forgot it. And we would get these placards that we could hang on the shower and to do self-checking. And so I was familiar with it in high school and in college. And because of Coach Porter, I was able to know that this was something that could happen and knew how to kind of check for it. And I have tried to get in touch with him and have been unsuccessful with it, because I'll just never forget him, his story, Jason Struble. And I know it was like in the early 90s, I think through some research I had done, that it was the early 90s that this all went down, but he told the story, and it was just something I never forgot. And when it came time to check, I had started noticing my left testicle was enlarged in May of 2010. And I'm 24 years old, and I just knew something wasn't right. But I just kind of kept it under wraps, because you think you're mature at 24, but you really aren't. And the thing that scared me the most is whenever you get a cancer diagnosis, all you hear about are people getting bankrupt and not having any money, and they're doing fundraisers and everything like that, because we have created a society in which people and companies get rich off of cancer. They can't produce something that's economical. They have to produce something that is costly so that they can make a profit. That's what's always kind of frustrated it with me. But I was just really nervous about saying something, because I'm like, I'm 24. How am I going to pay for all this? And that's what scared me the most. But I'll never forget it. I was driving to Mattoon Illinois to cover the American Legion Great Lakes Regional. And I'm on I-57 between Champaign and Mattoon, and my mom calls me. She said, "Hey, your dad had a colonoscopy, and I just want to let you know that it came back. Everything's good. So we're in the clear with that." And I said, "Well, Mom, I think I may have a problem." And I said, "My left testicle is huge." And I had noticed it for almost 3 months. And so I get to Mattoon, and my mom is just like, "You've got to see a doctor. You have to get this checked out." Well, I'm on an assignment, and my number one priority is covering the Moline American Legion team that was at just one state. They won it in Crystal Lake, and I went down to Mattoon to cover it. And I could have been there for 2 days. I could have been there for 6 days. And so I call and get an appointment with a local doctor at like a convenient care or whatever. It's a Carl Clinic in Mattoon. And because I couldn't just go see a urologist, I had to get referred to a urologist. So I go and I see the doctor. I don't remember his name in Mattoon, and he thought it was a hydrocele because he shined a light through my scrotum, and he could see that the light kind of coming through there. But I could feel like some gross, like kind of going up toward my abdomen. So he referred me to a just back in the Quad Cities, and Moline ended up winning the tournament. They won the Great Lakes Regional, so they were advanced to the American Legion World Series. It was in Spokane, Washington.
Mhm.
So that was on a Monday that they won. Tuesday was when my appointment was. His name was Dr. McKay in Davenport, Iowa. And I get back to the Quad Cities, and my mom came up. My mom is a retired teacher, but at the time she was still teaching. She came up and went to the appointment with me and saw Dr. McKay, and he ended up getting an ultrasound. So we got an ultrasound, and I thought I was kind of in the clear because he wasn't like super concerned at the time, but was, and maybe more so just to kind of ease my anxiety. But I remember my mom and I went to lunch, and my parents live in Quincy. That's where I grew up, Quincy, Illinois. So she goes back to Quincy, and I went to the office and booked the trip to Spokane. I booked a flight, hotel, rental car, all that sort of stuff. I wasn't supposed to leave until Thursday. And the next day I got up and I was going to go to Des Moines. My uncle was the CEO of the Iowa State Fair, and I was going to go to Des Moines and go to the State Fair for 24 hours before I left to go to Spokane. And I just remember it was a Wednesday. I just remember that like I was going to get a bad phone call. Like I didn't have positive vibes about it. And it was like 8 o'clock in the morning. I went in, I took a shower, and I got out. I checked my phone. I had a missed call and a voicemail. And it was Dr. McKay, and he said, "It's cancer. You got to come in. We got to talk. We got to get this figured out." So I call my mom and tell her, and then I go to the Dr. McKay's office, and he tells me, he's like, we got to have surgery, and there's a spot open tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And so, okay, we got to do this. And my mom and my dad came up from Quincy, and one of my mom's older sisters, she lives in Bloomington. She was a C-level employee. I can't remember if it was chief executive officer or chief financial officer at one of the hospitals in Bloomington. So she came over as well. And, I had testicular cancer, and all I know is I'm going to have surgery tomorrow. And I just remember sitting in my apartment. I lived in Davenport, Iowa at the time, and I'm just like, we got to get out of here. We got to go do something. I just sitting here and feeling sorry. It's just not going to really help us. So we ended up going to Chili's that night. Didn't really say much, but so that was how the entire process started. And the next day surgery was at 10. And the only time I was ever really like freaked out was I remember walking from the waiting room into the operating room, and my mom was with me, and she opened this door, and my oldest sister was there, and I just kind of caught her eye, and I could just kind of tell it wasn't a good day. But I walk into the OR, and that's when it was real. And I had surgery before. Now up to that point, the only surgery I had was I got tonsils removed. And so like surgery, but not, that's surgery that's a basic surgery. This one, they're removing a part of a body that isn't intended to be mess with. And I just remember walking in there and you see all the tools and everything. I'm like, wow, this is real. That's where I kind of started to freak out a little bit. And the anesthesiologist was late. He was coming over from another place. And I just remember he's like, well, I'm going to give you something that I typically give after we knock you out. It's kind of potent. And I remember him giving it to me. I was like, oh, wow, this is interesting. And so I had surgery. I walked out of there. I walked in at 8 a.m. I think I walked out of there about noon, 1 o'clock. And, that was the 24-hour whirlwind of, I guess it was 48 hours from seeing Dr. McKay and getting checked out there to the surgery and having that removed. So it was an interesting experience. And I just remember my mom asking me, she's like, well, how long had you noticed this? And I said, since May. And she's like, I can't believe that you didn't say anything. And I said, well, Mom, I just didn't want to go bankrupt or whatever. And she's just like, you have health insurance. That's the whole point of it. And besides my urologist and whomever was in that operating room, my mom was the only other person that saw it. And it was like a grapefruit down there. It was huge. And again, I had noticed it, and there were a lot of sleepless nights that what am I going to do? Because it's just like you hope it's something that goes away, and obviously it wasn't. And it took my dad having a colonoscopy for me to say something about it, because it was I would have handled it differently at 34 as opposed to 24, and that's just not something that you really expect to have to deal with on there.
Yeah, you're not the only person I've talked to that has said the same thing about health insurance and money and worrying about, how to pay for it. And it's too bad that we all have to think that way, that you can't go for the care that you want because of that. But you had mentioned to me in our earlier correspondence about you won't ever forget the doctor's moment, I guess, when he told you or he talked to you about this. You want to go down that road for us? So
Dr. McKay had an atrocious bedside. He was just not good in terms of a bedside manner. However, as a doctor, as a surgeon, he was excellent. So he wasn't the warm and fuzzy type, but he made sure to do everything that he thought needed to be done in order to get the right diagnosis. And then with the surgery and everything, all was well with that. And then luckily I had a friend in the Quad Cities who was a masseuse therapist, and she knew of an oncologist director that I should meet up with, and his name was Dr. Mercer. It was Iowa Cancer Specialist in Davenport. He was a fantastic oncologist who was just had a great bedside manner. Didn't take himself too seriously. Sometimes with doctors, you get some elitists, some country club types, but he seemed like a blue collar guy, liked motorcycles, and could really relate very well to me. And I really admired and respected him. He was awesome, and wasn't the it's my way or the highway. He let me make decisions and was open about things like that. And I will forever respect Dr. McKay because he handled it how it should have been. And I can look past the bedside manner thing, but he did exactly what he was supposed to, and I'll always respect him for that. And Dr. Mercer is somebody that I had a lot of respect for as well.
So you did one round of chemo, right? Is that right?
Yes. So initially, Mercer had recommended radiation, and my mom and dad always made a point to one of them come up to the Quad Cities whenever I had an appointment. And Quincy, the Quad Cities was 2.5 hours, so that's 5 hours in a car. And so the appointment that I had with the radiation oncologist, I told my parents, I said, don't worry about coming to this one. It'll, don't worry, I can take care of it. And it was Dr. Bigliotti. He was Italian. He had a very distinct Italian accent, and he was a really awesome guy too. And I remember him walking in, and he's just like, Dr. Mercer's recommended radiation, and you're 24, and I just don't feel comfortable giving somebody 24 years old radiation because we don't know the long-term effects. If you're 60, we're not going to worry about that, but you're 24, and I just don't feel comfortable doing that. So I remember leaving that appointment freaking out a little bit because, okay, what path do I take? What direction do I go? So I went back and met with Dr. Mercer, my oncologist, and he said, get a second opinion. You have to do what's best for you. Get a second opinion. And my mom, older sister Annalie, the one that came over the Quad Cities when I was diagnosed, and my mom's younger brother, Tom, we call him T, he worked at St. Francis Hospital in Peoria, and they have, a renowned cancer specialist there. He got me an appointment, or the two of them got me an appointment. His name was Dr. Fishkin at the Illinois Cancer Center in Peoria, and he laid out the treatment options for me. I believe there was 3, and he said, this is, you could just do where you're at. There wasn't a lot of spreading, but it would be good, so you could just do blood tests and we'll see where it goes, or you can do, I forget what the third one was, but the second one was you would, have chemo, and we would have, it could be 1, it could be 4 rounds, we don't know, but we would start out with 1 and kind of see where it went from there. And that's what we ended up doing. I ended up having the chemo in Peoria, and I just remember it was a Monday morning when that went down, and I remember walking into that room and just seeing all the patients in there, people with a port. That was hard. That's when it's real that this is actually happening. And I remember sitting next to a guy who had a port, and he didn't look like he was feeling sorry for himself. He just was on his computer, just kind of chilling and doing that. But they gave me anti-nausea medication, and then I remember the doctor's like, this would be good for you to use if you ever are hungover. Just if there's a couple extra pills, you can take these. It will kind of help with the hangover. But they did recommend 10 years of surveillance, which was, that one was still hard because still worried. Okay, are they going to find something to get everything? But I remember Dr. Fishkin saying, here are the survival rates for, and I can't remember if it was seminoma or non-seminoma. For some reason, I want to say it was a seminoma that I had. It was the opposite of what Lance Armstrong had because it wasn't as aggressive. Yeah. Because mine didn't spread. It just spread a little bit into my abdomen. It hadn't really attacked the lymph nodes too much, but he was like, you had like a 98.3% success rate with this. And, 98.3 is those are pretty good odds there. But I'll just, never forget, I got to mention my grandma here. My grandpa, Makarewicz, died July 1st, 2010. So about 6 weeks before I was diagnosed, he passed away. And when I got diagnosed, my grandma had said, how much is your out of pocket? Like, what's the cap on your out of pocket? And I said, well, Grandma, it's $2,000. And she said, I'll send a check for $1,000 to take care of that. And, my grandma was, and she passed away in 2018, but my grandma was child of the Depression, and my grandpa wasn't one that really liked to spend money. He was a cheap Polish guy from St. Louis, and I loved Grandpa, but he lived frugally. Grandma was a little bit more willing to help out, and I'll just never forget that because she just buried her husband. Her life was kind of in a turmoil a little bit, and she did that. I'll never forget her for that. She didn't have to do it, but that just kind of eased some anxiety there. And if you want a description of Grandma Makarewicz, that was her right there. She helped others, and she did it without fanfare. She was kind of low key with that. And I was never able to repay her. The best thing I could do for her was she was an important person in my life. and I stayed in touch with her as best I could. But I wish I could have repaid her in some way. But I just never forgot that. And then in another story I have with it is, I had I still kind of struggle with mental health because, my self-confidence is kind of low because I have a 6-inch scar down there. I have one testicle, and that's always been a problem for me because I feel deformed a little bit. But I was kind of struggling one day, and my mom texted me. I remember I was covering a soccer game because I was still at the paper, and my mom is just like, "Hey, you need to call me ASAP." And so I call her, and she said, I was checking the mail today, and somebody put in a blank envelope with $100 bill in it and a note, and I still have the note. I do this, but it just said, "You will beat this." And randomly, for a couple of years, this person would leave a $100 bill or a $50 bill at my parents' house, and I, to this day, have no idea who it is. But the person knew, like, a couple of years after I got sick, I bought a house, and congrats on the new house, but do something with it. And I would say, just randomly over the course of a couple of years, it was probably close to $1,000 that this person left me, and I, to this day, have no idea who it is. And I have all the notes that this person left, but that was something good that happened out of it. And the positives there of just people looking out for others and thinking about others before they think about themselves. That's just something that's really kind of stuck with me through that process.
That's an amazing story, Daniel. Wow, how nice. I mean, and you still don't know who it was. So, and I think your grandma, she probably was, the gift she had was that you were still around. I mean, so.
Yeah. And that was hard because, my mom's parents, her father passed away in 1970, so I never got to meet him. And my mom's mom, we called her Grammy, wonderful woman. She died in 2005, and I miss her to this day. I miss my grandparents to this day. But my grandpa, his death was hard because he was the only grandpa that I ever met, and he was a good man who, I just remember when the Cardinals won the World Series in 2006. He was the first person I called. And when the Blues won the Stanley Cup in 2019, I had gone to Game 7 of the Western Conference semifinals against the Dallas Stars with my Uncle T, and we got these rally flags, or rally towels. And when the Blues won the Stanley Cup, I have an aunt and uncle. My grandparents lived in Sedalia, Missouri, and I sent my aunt and uncle the rally towel to put at his grave, just because he was a big Blues fan too, and the fact they won it. I was thinking of my grandpa when they won the Stanley Cup. That was the first thing that came to my mind was, Grandpa would love this because he was just, my passion for St. Louis sports. And I think my writing ability came from my grandpa because he could write really good letters, and he was a very articulate person. And, his loss was hard. And then, I knew something was wrong with me at the funeral and everything like that, but I just didn't know how to deal with it. Again, at 24 years old, you're not capable emotionally or mentally to be able to handle grown-up things. You think you are, but you're just not. And
I agree.
It was good. It was good that my parents, were supportive of that. And I have 2 older sisters. They were incredibly supportive of it as well. But, I had outside people who, again, this person left me $1,000. I couldn't. The only thing I know was it was somebody I played football in high school. It was somebody because he had kind of cryptically put, your friend on the line, or a former teammate, or referred to me as captain because I was captain my senior year. So he knew that. But to this day, I wish I would know, and hopefully they see this and will know that how much it meant to me and how much I appreciated it.
So what was your biggest challenge, do you think, through the chemo and the surgery and all of that?
I think it was just the staying mentally tough. That was a struggle. I think it kind of magnified. I've struggled with anxiety and depression through my adult life, and I think that kind of magnified it a little bit because while I'm grateful to have beaten it, there was, the 6-inch scar down there and the one testicle. Like, that still to this day bothers me. And I know, like, outsiders would say, well, you beat it, you should be happy, and I am. But it's still kind of a reminder of what I have to go through. Every day you see it. Getting out of the shower and you see it, putting on clothes, you see it. And I mean, I guess it would be, from a female perspective, it would be having a mastectomy with breast cancer, and that's just the hard part. I know that it's not 100. I don't have any kids, and I'm 36, almost 37 now. I don't know if that, but with partners, it's like I'm not 100% sure that I can have kids. And but I look at, like, what Lance Armstrong was able to accomplish, because he had kids after that. But the toughest part is just the mental aspect of, like, because I still am cautious if I have, like, pain in my lower back. Leukemia starting, or if I have a bad headache, is that a brain tumor?
I know.
Like, you just wonder about that, because I'll tell this story. If you look at the football picture of my freshman year, because I went to Quincy Notre Dame High School in Quincy, Illinois. If you look at the class or the 2000 football season, I had testicular cancer. Starting quarterback, ended up getting brain cancer and succumbing to it, and or starting running back, ended up getting brain cancer and succumbing to it. So there were 3 on there, and then a classmate of mine, a couple years after we graduated high school, had leukemia, and that was. So you look at it, and it's just like, okay, that's where I feel a little bit blessed that I had something that was easily detectable,
Right.
and they had good treatments for it. And in that regard, you kind of feel guilty that you were able to survive and beat it. That was kind of hard to, dealing with that. And then the other thing is, I have a cousin who lives in Minneapolis. In 2016, right around this time, it's April 16. I think it was like April 15th of 2016. She was diagnosed with leukemia, and I had one of my nephews on Valentine's Day 2020 was diagnosed with lymphoma. So, like, is there something genetically that we're having to deal with? And luckily, my nephew beat it. Did an awesome job. My cousin, she beat it. She's since gotten married, has a son, and is doing really well. So, I mean, if there's anything that we can look at, we've had leukemia, testicular cancer, and lymphoma, and we've all been able to beat it and do well. But genetic testing is something that I've spoken with my oncologist about, and at some point I wouldn't mind doing that just to see, okay, what's going on here? Because we were between the ages of, Thomas was 11, or he was almost 11 at the time, and Elizabeth, she was like 27, 28 at the time. So we were between the ages of 10 and 27 when all this went down.
Wow. Yeah, you think about it. Is there a genetic component to it, or were you exposed to something that, there's so many environmental things too that we don't know. So
Correct.
So I'm kind of curious, because I spent some years as a newspaper reporter too early in my career. And how did you then, so you were writing as sports writer, and I know you still do some of that. How did you, you didn't go to Seattle, I guess, when you had that plane ticket made, or did you go?
Moline played like at night in Spokane, and the itinerary was Moline, Minneapolis, and Spokane. And another colleague of mine ended up making the trip. Well, there was bad fog in Minneapolis, so the flight was late. He didn't even get there until after the game was over in Spokane. So that was all that. But years after that, Moline went to the Great Lakes Regional again. This time it was in Midland, Michigan, and I covered it. And I'll never forget it. They lost their first game. It was double elimination. So they played, I think it was either 6 or 7 games they had to play. They ended up winning the regional. So they went to the World Series. This time it was in Shelby, North Carolina. And I went to North Carolina. And that was cool because it was just like, okay, I missed something really cool and really important, and I was given another opportunity to cover it. Right. And it was a special assignment. The Moline Legion baseball coach is one of my best friends to this day. And I remember when I booked the trip, I made sure I got there the day before, so that if there were any travel issues, because I flew into Charlotte, that I was able to get there in time, and that was cool because it's like, okay, I didn't miss out on something. And but I was very lucky in my journalism career to cover some awesome things. I'll never forget it. When I was doing chemo, all I wanted was just normalcy. The entire process, that's just all I wanted, normalcy. And I remember there was a basketball player from Rock Island who ended up going, he won Mr. Basketball that year, went to Stanford, had a great basketball career there. And I remember interviewing him because he had an official visit to Stanford, and I interviewed him late that Sunday night. I remember staying in a hotel in Peoria with my mom and sitting, getting chemo, and writing that article because I just wanted some normalcy on there. And that was cool. But my journalism career, I was able to. I went to Madison Square Garden and covered the NIT. I went to Memphis to cover the NCAA tournaments, St. Louis, and was able to cover a lot of awesome things, meet a lot of great people, and every single one of the people that I dealt with who knew about my situation were supportive. The first person, aside from family, that I told that I had cancer was the Rock Island girls soccer coach who had brain cancer.
Oh.
And so he told me, he's like, hey, get this book. It's called Not About the Bike. It's Lance Armstrong. And I read it. I still have it. It was very helpful. And he was really supportive with everything. And unfortunately, he succumbed to brain cancer on November 30th, 2014. He had the third time it came back is what got him. But he was a very important person in my life. It was just the support and the encouragement, and just a really good man. And the coaches, the athletes that I dealt with were all just awesome to me. I wish that my former sports editor would have been a little bit more supportive, but that's another story for another day. But the people I was around, the various schools and organizations and everything, were just always really, really helpful, really supportive, and very understanding.
Yeah. So it sounds like you had a really good, I'll say illustrious journalism career, and now I know you're teaching. So can you talk a little bit about that transition? I mean, anything you want to share. It's
Well, I could talk for a while about this. Is that going to be a problem?
Yeah. Okay.
Ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be a journalist. My parents got the Quincy Herald Whig and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and that was something. I enjoyed sports. I enjoyed writing, and went to Illinois State, majored in journalism. I will say this: some of the most important people in my life, and I have wonderful parents who have been supportive, and just I feel like I won the parent lottery. My parents are awesome. My sisters, they have always been supportive and awesome. Their spouses, both of my sister's husbands, are just good men who have been supportive, and I have 4 nephews who are awesome. But the people outside my family, outside my inner circle, who have been the most helpful in my journalism, or not even journalism, just in life, my professional career, have been at the Quincy Herald Whig, where I worked at in high school. Matt Shuckman and Don O'Brien were just tremendous to me. And then in college, I worked at the Pantograph in Bloomington, Illinois, and it was Jim Benson, Randy Reinhardt, Randy Kindred, Randy Scherer, Doug Ham, Mike Agnes. All those were so good to an 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old, and just awesome. They taught me how to be a professional, how to work hard, and how to be successful in the job. So I worked at the Quincy Herald Whig in high school, and then when I went to Illinois State, I worked Pantograph, and they gave me incredible opportunities to cover Division I sports, professional sports, high school sports, and that helped me get the job in Moline at the Dispatch. And that was a great situation. But journalism, unfortunately, especially print journalism, you work nights and weekends. You don't make a lot of money. The last 6 years I worked at the paper, I made $13.59 an hour. And I had a degree. I won awards, and we had ratings every quarter, and I would always be rated exceptional. And I was told there's just no more money that you can make here. And dream job, people say, like, it's not about the money, and it, for a long time it wasn't, but then, you have to make ends meet.
Yeah.
And I was working all the time because during the day I would substitute teach, and then at night I would go and cover an event or work in the office. And when it just didn't become fun anymore, because I'm waking up, getting to school at 7:30, and I'm getting home at midnight after a shift, and so I had left journalism for a couple of years and was a proposal writer for a tech company in Davenport, Iowa. But I knew that was just going to kind of be a temporary thing. And when I substitute taught, I enjoyed the interactions with the kids and other teachers. And my mom was a kindergarten teacher for a long time at one of the Catholic schools in Quincy. And my oldest sister, she is a fourth grade teacher at one of the Catholic schools in Quincy. So teaching was kind of something that I'd always thought about. And I ultimately decided to pursue a master's degree and to become a teacher. And English I could have done English, I could have done social studies, but I wanted to go the English route because I like the writing component. I'm lucky that we teach a lot of writing,
Yeah.
and I feel like that's something that is, and it's not just like writing an essay. I try to teach the kids how to write an email, and we practice that one. Writing a resume, writing a cover letter. The kids write a memoir, and that can really help them with a college application or a scholarship application, just more so real world stuff. And if you asked my students, what's one thing that you've learned in class, a lot of them would say like the resume writing, and that's really important. And I try to get them to practice emails to do that. And I'm lucky. I teach in Highland, Illinois, at Highland High School, and I have, every student that I've had, whether it be my first year, 2 years ago, or last year, this year, has just been incredible, and they've been supportive. And I always thank them because they make coming to school each day so enjoyable. And they're just awesome kids. I have just awesome kids that walk into class. Now, they may say I'm kind of sassy and I'm sarcastic, and I like quoting Seinfeld, and one of my favorite lines is, if the kids are kind of acting up, I'll tell them to step off. That's from Seinfeld.
Okay, yeah.
That's a good line, and the kids are just awesome. They make the job so enjoyable, and I have just great colleagues, whether it be in my department or in the rest of the faculty, and a very supportive administration that's got my best interest in my back. So journalism was an outstanding career, but I just don't miss it. I don't, the hours and it's nice going to a sporting event, just being there as a fan. I try to go to a lot of Highland High School events to support the kids, and it's just nice when the game's over. Okay, I leave. Now, I have been able to help, like freelance. I freelance for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and then Quincy has this Muddy River News, Muddy River Sports. I've been able to cover things for them because if a school, like if Quincy High or Quincy Notre Dame plays down here in something, I'll cover it for them. And so I get that, but I don't like to do it too much because I just don't really miss it. I going to school and interacting with the kids and being a teacher still is just fun. And I know that kind of teaching the profession's kind of under attack, but I just don't know of a better job where every day is different and you're surrounded by just our young kids, our young generation. I think while they can be better in certain things, I think that's part of the adults' fault, is maybe lowering our standards and expectations. But the kids, they'll find a way to overcome things. And I tell them, the seniors, when they were freshmen, school was called off in March. Then their sophomore year, they had to wear masks the entire time, and we had a hybrid schedule. And then their junior year, they had to wear masks up until February, and they found a way to overcome it. And I said, if anybody can adapt, it's you kids, because you found a way to do it. And the kids, I think, will always be resilient and will always want to do the right thing. But the kids, they just make it such a fun job, and because no 2 days are the same, and they they really, I'm lucky to have some great students who just, and I tell them, you make it fun for me to be here every single day. And I think if you're not making school fun, then there's no reason to be there. Now we work and there are high expectations, but we have to laugh at some point every day in class. We have to find a way to do that. And I try to do that, because if I'm not laughing, then the day's just not very fun at all. So
they're very lucky to have a teacher like you, Daniel. I mean, not every teacher can be as excited about it. I think it's wonderful, and I think the fact that you teach practical things in your English class as well as everything else, because I had good English teachers too in high school, and I think it makes a big difference. And you teach them things that they can use now, like how to write an email and their resume. And, I think that's so important. So congrats to you for doing that. So,
and I try to tell kids that there's 3 things that you can take from this class that you can apply to anything in life: critical thinking skills, analytical skills, and problem solving skills. If you can do those 3 things, you're going to be a very valuable employee. And because I know we're studying a fellow in the English 4 class right now. And I said, I get this is from, Venice, it was written in the 1600s. I understand that it may not relate to you, but if you can critically think and analyze and problem solve, which is what we're trying to do here, then you're going to be successful in college and in whatever career you have, because that's what's going to make you successful. So that's what I try to hit home with them every single day, because not everybody is going to be an English teacher. I have students who are going to be carpenters or pipe fitters or nurses or civil engineers or psychologists or vets, and all of those skills can apply to those disciplines.
Right. So back to just the testicular cancer for a moment. What would you tell any young man that might think he has testicular cancer? They find a lump, or any advice you want to share?
Just say something. Get it checked out immediately, because luckily testicular cancer is pretty easy to detect, because if there's an issue down there, you can see it, and it's important to say something, get it checked out, and the survival rate is improving. I wish it could be at 0, but it's not right now. But I believe it is the number 1 cancer for males between the ages of 15 and 35.
It is.
So, and that's what, I haven't gotten to that rapport yet with students saying, here's some placards to check it. But I have talked about it to my students about what I went through, and, just check. If you notice that there's something wrong, say something. Don't put yourself in a position where it's going to be too late, and there's nothing to be ashamed with about it, because, I don't know why I got it. I'll never know why I got it, but it is what it is. And you just kind of have to accept the reality of it and figure out how to overcome it. And it's a shame that somebody, like, again, I was 24 and I wasn't equipped to handle it. And you could be 15 and get it. And how are you going to handle it? And it's also surprising how many, like, you see professional athletes. I know that like Jamison Tyone was one that he had testicular cancer, and it's just kind of amazing really how much it does impact males.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's just, check. If you notice something is wrong, get it checked out. And because even if it may not be anything, all right, but you need to have that peace of mind on it, and it just got to be proactive with it. I waited 3 months, and luckily it wasn't super serious after it, but it could have been.
Yeah.
But it's just, you got to be proactive with it. And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I think there's a problem down here. Pride is a good thing, but sometimes it can be detrimental. And just check.
Okay.
Just check, and if you notice something, say something. That's the best advice I can give on that one.
Okay. So what's next for you? I know you're teaching and you're liking it. Anything you want to share about as you look ahead for you?
I just want to find happiness.
Yeah.
That's my number 1 priority, is finding happiness. I've been reading various things, and that's what I think we as a society needs, just to be happy. And that's what I'm working toward, trying to make some changes in, I've made changes in my professional life and found something that's made me happy. And as I said earlier, I still struggle with mental health, and I'm still working on that. I just am trying to find happiness. And some days it's like, oh, I'm close to it, and other days I'm not even near the on-ramp to it. But that's what I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to, that's the one thing for me, is just finding happiness, and I'll work toward that as hard as I can. But as you know, some days it's not easy, but you just gotta keep going. I think that's where dealing with something like cancer is days aren't going to be easy, but you just got to keep going. I just will never forget my grandfather. He had lung cancer toward the end, and they zapped him with chemo, and they zapped him with radiation. And I just said, Grandpa, like, you ever get tired of this? And he just said, it's all part of living. And that stuck with me, that sometimes the days are going to be fantastic, and other days they're just not.
Right.
And that's all part. It's the highs and lows, but I'm searching for happiness, and that's something that I will continue to pursue until I reach that point.
So maybe that's a good segue to talk about the Cubs and the St. Louis teams. Only being in Chicago, but I just, that rivalry. So,
I just remember the Cubs won the World Series, and they're like, "Are you excited?" I'm like, "No, I'm not excited for them, and like in any way, shape, or form."
Okay.
That's just kind of how it is, because I doubt when the Cardinals won the World Series, Cubs fans are overly thrilled.
That's true. You're right
with that one.
Yeah.
Because I was in Chicago actually the night they won the pennant, when they beat the Dodgers, and I was filming something at Comcast had their studios and Merchandise Mart. I remember there was like the bottom of the eighth when we got done. I'm like, I got to get out of here. I'm going home just to kind of beat all that sort of stuff. And my middle sister, Katie, her and her husband lived in Wrigleyville. They lived 3 blocks west of Wrigley Field.
Okay.
And it was kind of cool to walk around. They've since moved to Omaha, but it was kind of cool to walk around and see all that. But the only thing I like about Chicago is the food, and I think like Lake Michigan is pretty cool.
Yeah,
just to be right there on the lake, and just the food is. I always like Overweiss Dairy, and I'm a big fan of these pizza, and Portillo's is always good. And I have 2 cousins that live up in the suburbs, and they live by some great places.
Yeah.
And but I've heard about Pequod's Pizza, and how, people raving about that.
My son's been there.
But if you add like Chicago and say like it's the tavern style, the thin crust is what is the best type of pizza in Chicago. So,
that's what I like, is the thin crust. So.
Oh yeah, thin and crispy with pepperoni and sausage.
Yeah.
That's always a good thing. And if my students watch this, they won't be shocked that we're talking about food, because that typically is what we talk about quite a bit. My classroom is food and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So and sports, but yeah. And Overweiss Dairy, that's still good stuff too.
It is, very good.
But that's all.
Any ice cream is good for me, so I love ice cream.
Oh yeah. I could eat ice cream every day.
Yeah, me too.
And it would be okay. Yeah. That's kind of how it is.
So my last question is, Daniel, what song, when you hear it, you just have to sing along to it?
Cute Without the E by Taking Back Sunday. It's a band from Long Island, and when I was in college, I had some friends. We enjoyed having fun, and this song we would play at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. We all would start singing it, and I've seen them a couple times in concert. I saw them at Northerly Island there in Chicago, and then I saw them in Kansas City, and both times I saw them, they opened with that song.
Okay.
And it was just awesome. And yeah, so Cute Without the E, Taking Back Sunday. The album is called Tell All Your Friends. My favorite album of all time is that one. And so they're unique because it's always kind of a duet that they sing, and their lyrics are really powerful.
Okay.
And they kind of hit home with me. So, well, now I'm reciprocating. What what song you listen to that you have to sing?
I love the Beatles. So, and I mean, it all started in high school with me and the Beatles. And so any Beatles song I love to sing along to. That's probably my favorite. So Twist and Shout's one I really like.
Oh, that's a great, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes me think of Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Okay. Yeah.
When he sings that in the parade.
Yeah. Yeah. But I love the Beatles still. So.
But my car is always one.
Yeah.
I like at the end where they're like beep beep.
Yep.
Beep, like that. I just think that's kind of. I just always like that touch on there.
Yeah, they're very creative. I mean, some of their whatever you call them, extras, I guess they put in their songs. But
yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Well, I thank you for your time and telling us everything about your journey with testicular cancer, and I'm glad you are here. The teaching, I think, is really exciting because I think having a good teacher makes such a difference for all of us.
I feel like public schools teaching education is under attack.
Yeah.
People aren't getting the full scope of what's going on in a school. And if they walked into Highland High School, they would see the good that there is in education. We have kids who do follow the rules. We have kids who want to learn. We have teachers who aren't indoctrinating students. They're educating students. And I feel like people may be kind of closed-minded about what is happening in schools because there are good teachers, there are good students, there are good schools, there is good curriculum going on there. The schools, everything in our society could be better. Every single level of our society could be better. But there's a lot of good that's going on in our school, and we have a lot of young people who have handled COVID and everything, rebounded. We have good people coming up here, and we just need to, if we feel like there's something negative going on, let's see what positives. But there are a lot of positives that I feel like get overlooked every single day in our education system because of whatever reason's going on here. But there are a lot of positives that I don't think are broadcasted enough.
Right.
Because I have great kids who are going to do great things in this world, and we need to look at that. They always say, 3% of the issues at a school, 90% of the issues at school come from 3% of the population there. Well, it seems like we look at 3% of negative instead of 97% of the positive that's going on every single day in our society. So we have good teachers, good students, good schools, and we need to remember that because that is happening every single day.
I agree. So thank you that's an important perspective. So just again, thank you for being with me on the podcast, and a lot of people will hear your story and hopefully help them. So thanks.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for the work that you're doing for this. We need more people like you.
Well, thank you. I mean, we got to raise awareness, right? So that's what we're trying to do. So
yeah, and all one last time, all this started because of Dave Porter, the old Lafayette basketball coach. So if he sees this, or if anybody knows of Dave Porter, the old Lafayette basketball coach, I hope he sees this, because without him, I would not have known any of this, and his story impacted me. And I know when people do things like that, they say if it can impact one person, then it's done. Well, he did his job.
Right.
That was something that I'll never forget him. I'll never forget his story. And I hope we get to a point where we don't have to talk about testicular cancer anymore. That we found a way to get rid of it. Because I know when that day happened, I might be popping some champagne and I may be going on a bender a little bit to celebrate it. So I hope that day comes sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode of Don't Give Up on Testicular Cancer. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to our program on your favorite podcast directory. You can also visit the Max Mallory Foundation at www.maxmalloryfoundation.com/podcast to listen to previous podcast episodes or donate to the foundation. Join us again next time for another episode of Don't Give Up on Testicular Cancer.